What if I told you that everything you've been taught about control is backwards? That the harder you grip, the more slips through your fingers. That the very act of holding on is what's keeping you stuck, stressed, and struggling. Most people spend their entire lives trying to control everything. Their thoughts, their emotions, other people's reactions, outcomes they can't influence. They exhaust themselves fighting battles they can never win, creating suffering where none needs to exist. They think that letting go means giving up, becoming passive, or losing their edge. But here's what the top 1% of high performers know that everyone else doesn't. True power comes from letting go. Not the kind of letting go that makes you weak or passive, but strategic detachment that gives you unshakable inner strength and paradoxical control over your reality. The most successful people in the world, from ancient philosophers to modern billionaires, have mastered this counterintuitive truth. They understand that when you stop trying to control everything, you gain control over the only thing that actually matters, yourself. When you release your death grip on outcomes, you free up massive mental energy to focus on what you can actually influence. When you let go of the need to be right, you become unstoppable in your pursuit of what works. This is not about becoming a passive doormat or giving up on your ambitions. This is about strategic psychological warfare against the forces that keep you trapped in cycles of stress, anxiety, and mental resistance. This is about mastering the art of non-attachment while remaining fiercely committed to your goals. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why letting go is the ultimate form of mental mastery, how to release the invisible chains that bind your mind, and how to operate from a state of flow that makes achievement feel effortless. You'll discover that true freedom isn't about controlling your external world. It's about liberating yourself from the internal prison of attachment, resistance, and the desperate need to make everything go your way. The question isn't whether you can afford to let go. The question is whether you can afford not to. Chapter 1: The Grip of Control. You wake up every morning with a mental to-do list that goes far beyond your actual tasks. Control the traffic so you're not late. Control your boss's mood during the meeting. Control how your presentation is received. Control your partner's reaction to something you said yesterday. Control the outcome of that important email you sent. Control, control, control. But here's the brutal truth. You're not actually controlling any of these things. You're just creating an elaborate illusion of control while slowly driving yourself insane. Every moment you spend trying to manage the unmanageable is a moment stolen from your actual power, your real influence, your true potential. The modern world has sold you a lie. It's convinced you that successful people are those who have everything under control, who never show weakness, who can predict and manage every variable in their environment. But this is the mindset of someone who fundamentally misunderstands how power actually works. Real control is internal, not external. It's about governing your responses, not dictating circumstances. It's about mastering your mind, not micromanaging your world. The person who tries to control everything controls nothing. The person who controls their inner state controls everything that matters. Think about the last time you were truly stressed, anxious, or frustrated. I guarantee it wasn't because of what was happening to you. It was because of the gap between what was happening and what you thought should be happening. It was because reality refused to conform to your expectations, your demands, your need for things to go a certain way. This gap between expectation and reality is where all psychological suffering lies. And the wider you try to make your circle of control, the more suffering you create for yourself. Every person you try to change who won't change. Every outcome you try to force that won't be forced. Every situation you try to micromanage that spirals beyond your influence. You've been taught that caring means controlling, that if you really want something, you should grip it tightly. Think about it constantly, worry about all the ways it could go wrong, and exhaust yourself trying to manage every detail. But this approach doesn't just fail to give you what you want. It actively repels it. The universe responds to energy, not effort. And the energy of desperate control is repulsive. It's the energy of fear, of scarcity, of someone who doesn't trust the process or believe in their own ability to handle whatever comes. It's the energy of someone who thinks they're so powerless that they must control everything external to feel safe. But what if there was another way? What if the very thing you're afraid to do, let go, is exactly what would give you everything you've been struggling to achieve through force? What if your tight grip isn't protecting you, but strangling the life out of your dreams? The most powerful people in history understood this paradox. They knew that to influence the world, you must first release your need to control it. They knew that to achieve great things, you must first detach from the outcome. They knew that to get what you want, you must first let go of desperately needing it. This isn't spiritual bypassing or wishful thinking. This is practical psychology. When you operate from a place of attachment and control, you make decisions from fear. You see threats everywhere. You waste energy on battles that don't matter. You miss opportunities because you're too busy trying to force other opportunities that aren't meant for you. But when you operate from detachment, you make decisions from clarity. You see possibilities where others see problems. You invest your energy only where it can create real impact. You flow with opportunities instead of fighting against the current. The first step to reclaiming your power is recognizing how much energy you're currently wasting on the illusion of control. Every minute you spend trying to manage someone else's emotions is a minute not spent mastering your own. Every hour you spend worrying about outcomes you can't influence is an hour not spent taking actions you can control. Every day you spend fighting reality is a day not spent creating the reality you actually want. Your obsession with control isn't making you powerful. It's making you powerless. It's turning you into a reactive victim of circumstances instead of a proactive creator of your experience. It's keeping you trapped in a mental prison where you're constantly at war with the world instead of in flow with it. The cage door has been open this entire time. You've just been too busy trying to control the lock to notice. Chapter 2. The Illusion of Security. Every act of control is an act of fear disguised as strength. Every time you grip tighter, you're not demonstrating power. You're revealing terror. The terror that without your constant vigilance, everything will fall apart. The terror that you're not capable of handling whatever life brings. The terror that if you're not in control, you're out of control. But here's what no one tells you about security. The more you chase it, the less secure you become. The more you try to control outcomes, the more anxious you get about losing that control. The more you attempt to manage other people, the more dependent you become on their cooperation. The more you try to predict the future, the more fearful you become of uncertainty. True security doesn't come from controlling your environment. It comes from trusting your ability to adapt to any environment. It doesn't come from preventing problems. It comes from knowing you can solve whatever problems arise. It doesn't come from eliminating uncertainty. It comes from becoming comfortable with uncertainty. The people who appear most secure in the world aren't those who have eliminated all risk from their lives. They're those who have developed such strong internal resources that external circumstances can't shake them. They've built their security on the one foundation that can never be taken away: their own resilience, adaptability, and inner strength. But most people build their security on sand. They think if they can just get enough money, they'll feel secure. So they accumulate wealth, but then worry about losing it. They think if they can just find the right relationship, they'll feel secure. So they find someone, but then become possessive and controlling, driving away the very person they're trying to hold on to. They think if they can just achieve a certain status, they'll feel secure. So they climb the ladder, but then live in constant fear of falling. This external security is always temporary, always fragile, always dependent on factors beyond your ultimate control. The economy can crash, relationships can end, health can fail, status can be lost. When your sense of security depends on external circumstances remaining stable, you're building your life on a foundation that's guaranteed to crumble. The irony is that this false security actually makes you more vulnerable, not less. When you need everything to go your way to feel okay, you become a slave to circumstances. When you require other people to behave in certain ways for you to be happy, you give them all your power. When you can only function when you're in control, you become dysfunctional the moment you're not. Real security is internal. It's the unshakable knowledge that whatever happens, you'll figure it out. It's the deep confidence that comes from having survived difficulties before and knowing you can survive them again. It's the inner peace that comes from accepting that uncertainty is the only certainty, and that's perfectly fine. This kind of security can't be taken from you because it doesn't depend on anything external remaining the same. It grows stronger through challenges rather than weaker. It thrives in uncertainty rather than withering. It finds opportunity in chaos rather than just threat. But to develop this real security, you have to give up the false security of control. You have to stop trying to make the world predictable and start making yourself adaptable. You have to stop trying to eliminate risk and start building your capacity to handle risk. You have to stop demanding guarantees and start trusting your ability to navigate whatever comes. This is terrifying for most people because it means giving up the comforting illusion that you can make life safe. It means acknowledging that you're not actually in control of most of what happens to you. It means accepting that despite your best efforts, things will sometimes go wrong, people will sometimes disappoint you, and life will sometimes be unfair. But here's the liberation in this acceptance. Once you stop expecting life to be fair, controllable, and predictable, you stop being devastated when it's not. Once you accept uncertainty as natural rather than threatening, you stop wasting energy fighting against it. Once you realize that your worth isn't dependent on external outcomes, you stop needing to control those outcomes to feel valuable. The security you're seeking through control is a mirage. The more you chase it, the further it retreats. But the security that comes from inner strength, from adaptability, from trust in your own resilience, that's real and it's available to you right now. You just have to stop looking for it in all the wrong places. The strongest people in the world aren't those who never face adversity. They're those who've learned to dance with adversity. They've discovered that true security isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about learning to find peace within it. Chapter 3. The Weight of Attachment. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with rocks. Every attachment you have to outcomes, to people behaving certain ways, to things going according to your plan is another rock in that pack. The more attached you become, the heavier the load. The heavier the load, the slower you move. The slower you move, the less capable you are of adapting, responding, and thriving. Most people don't realize they're carrying this weight because they've been adding rocks one by one for so long that the burden feels normal. They think the exhaustion they feel at the end of each day is just part of life. They think the constant background stress is just how things are. They think the difficulty they have enjoying the present moment is just the price of being ambitious. But it's not. It's the price of attachment. And that price is far higher than most people realize. Attachment isn't love. Attachment isn't caring. Attachment isn't commitment. Attachment is the desperate need for things to be different than they are. For people to act differently than they do. For outcomes to align with your expectations, regardless of whether those expectations are realistic or beneficial. When you're attached to an outcome, you can't think clearly about it. Your judgment becomes clouded by your need for it to work out a certain way. You miss important information because you're filtering everything through the lens of what you want to see rather than what's actually happening. You make poor decisions because you're more committed to your desired outcome than to what the situation actually requires. When you're attached to a person behaving a certain way, you can't see them clearly. You see your expectations, your projections, your needs, but not the real person in front of you. You try to force them into the box of who you think they should be instead of accepting and working with who they actually are. You damage the relationship by trying to control it. When you're attached to being right, you can't learn. Your ego becomes more important than truth. You defend positions even when evidence suggests they're wrong. You waste energy being defensive instead of using that energy to discover better approaches. You become rigid when you need to be flexible. The Buddha called attachment the root of all suffering, and modern psychology has validated this ancient wisdom. Study after study shows that people who practice non-attachment experience lower levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. They have better relationships. They make better decisions. They achieve their goals more consistently and with less struggle. But here's where most people get confused. Non-attachment doesn't mean not caring. It means caring without clinging. It means being passionate without being desperate. It means wanting something while being okay. If it doesn't happen exactly as you envision, think of it like holding a bird. If you grip it too tightly, you'll crush it. If you don't hold it at all, it will fly away. The art is in holding it gently, present, caring, supportive, but not controlling. This is how you should hold your goals, your relationships, your plans, your entire life. When you practice non-attachment, something remarkable happens. You start making decisions from wisdom instead of neediness. You start seeing opportunities that were invisible when you were tunnel-visioned on one specific outcome. You start attracting what you want instead of repelling it with desperate energy. Non-attachment gives you the ultimate competitive advantage, the ability to adapt quickly when circumstances change. While others are still clinging to outdated strategies, you're already pivoting. While others are mourning what didn't work out, you're already exploring what might work better. While others are fighting against reality, you're flowing with it toward better possibilities. This doesn't make you passive or indifferent. If anything, it makes you more effective. When you're not attached to one specific path, you can see multiple paths. When you're not married to one approach, you can experiment with better approaches. When you're not emotionally invested in being right, you can invest that energy in getting results. The weight of attachment is invisible but crushing. It slows you down, clouds your judgment, limits your options, and exhausts your energy. Every moment you spend attached to things being different than they are is a moment not spent working with things as they are to create what you want. But removing this weight isn't about becoming cold or uncaring. It's about becoming warm without being clingy, passionate without being desperate, committed without being rigid. It's about discovering that you can care deeply while holding lightly. That you can pursue goals while accepting outcomes. That you can love people while letting them be themselves. The heaviest chains are often invisible. But once you recognize the weight of attachment, you can begin to set it down. One rock at a time, one expectation at a time, one desperate need for control at a time, until you're moving through life with the lightness and freedom that was always your birthright. Chapter 4. The Paradox of Surrender. The word surrender makes most ambitious people uncomfortable. It sounds like giving up, like weakness, like defeat. It conjures images of white flags and capitulation. But this discomfort reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what surrender actually means and why it's the secret weapon of the most powerful people in the world. True surrender isn't giving up. It's giving in to what is, to the flow of reality, to the intelligence of the universe that's far greater than your limited perspective. It's the recognition that your small self with its narrow view and desperate attachments isn't equipped to orchestrate the complexity of existence. It's the wisdom to stop fighting against the current and start working with it. Muhammad Ali understood this paradox perfectly. He would say, "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee." The floating was surrender, moving with the flow, staying relaxed, not fighting against his opponent's energy. The stinging was action, precise, powerful, perfectly timed. He didn't surrender his goal of winning. He surrendered his attachment to fighting in a rigid, forced way. And this made him unstoppable. The greatest entrepreneurs understand this too. They surrender their attachment to their original business plan. When market feedback suggests a better direction, they don't surrender their vision of success, but they surrender their stubborn insistence on one path to that success. This flexibility, This willingness to surrender control while maintaining direction is what allows them to build empires while others build elaborate failures. Strategic surrender is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in personal development. People think it means becoming passive, but actually it requires tremendous activity. People think it means having no goals, but actually it allows you to pursue goals more effectively. People think it means not caring about outcomes, but actually it means caring more about results than about being right. When you surrender, you don't give up your power. You stop wasting your power on battles you can't win, so you can focus it on battles you can. You don't become weak. You become strong enough to bend without breaking. You don't lose control. You gain control over the one thing that actually matters: your response to whatever happens. This is the paradox that confuses most people. Surrender gives you more control, not less. When you stop trying to control everything external, you gain complete control over everything internal. When you stop demanding that the world conform to your expectations, you gain the power to respond to the world as it actually is. When you stop fighting against reality, you gain the energy to shape the parts of reality that are actually malleable. But surrender requires courage, not cowardice. It takes tremendous strength to let go when every instinct is telling you to hold on tighter. It takes enormous faith to trust the process when you can't see the whole picture. It takes incredible wisdom to distinguish between what you can control and what you can't, and to pour your energy only into the former. The mind resists surrender because it's been trained to equate control with safety. It thinks that if you're not constantly managing, monitoring, and manipulating, everything will fall apart. But this is like thinking that if you stop trying to control the weather, the sun will stop rising. The universe operated quite well before you arrived, and it will continue operating according to laws and principles far more sophisticated than your personal preferences. What you resist persists. What you fight against grows stronger. What you try to control through force becomes more uncontrollable. But what you surrender to has no power over you because you're no longer giving it power through your resistance. When you stop pushing against a door marked pull, it opens effortlessly. This doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic. It means becoming responsive rather than reactive. It means moving from a place of wisdom rather than panic. It means acting from your highest self rather than your most fearful self. It means making decisions based on what will actually work rather than what you desperately want to work. The strongest trees are those that bend in the wind rather than trying to stand rigidly against it. The most powerful martial artists are those who use their opponent's force against them rather than meeting force with force. The most successful people are those who flow with circumstances while staying true to their deeper purposes. Surrender is not the opposite of action. It's the foundation of effective action. When you surrender your attachment to how things should unfold, you become available to how they actually can unfold. When you surrender your insistence on being in control, you become capable of true influence. When you surrender your desperate need for specific outcomes, you become magnetic to better outcomes than you could have imagined. The paradox of surrender is that you get what you want by letting go of needing it. You gain control by releasing control. You become powerful by admitting powerlessness over things beyond your influence. This isn't a mystical concept. It's a practical strategy that works because it aligns you with reality rather than against it. Chapter 5. Breaking the chains of expectation. Every expectation you carry is a chain around your mind. Some chains are so familiar you don't even notice them anymore. Others are so tight they're cutting off circulation to your happiness, your peace, your ability to see clearly, but all of them are self-imposed. And all of them can be removed the moment you decide you've carried them long enough. Expectations are premeditated resentments. They're setups for disappointment. They're demands you place on reality without reality's consent. And they're one of the primary sources of human suffering. Not because bad things happen, but because things happen differently than you expected them to. Your expectations about how your day should go, how people should treat you, how hard things should be, how quickly you should progress, how others should respond to your efforts, how fair life should be, how much control you should have. Each expectation is a story you've written about how reality should unfold. And when reality refuses to follow your script, you suffer. But here's the trap most people fall into. They think the solution is to have better expectations, more realistic expectations, lower expectations. They think if they can just calibrate their expectations properly, they'll be happy. But this misses the deeper point. The problem isn't what you expect. It's that you're expecting it all. Expectations are just thoughts about the future disguised as facts. They're your imagination pretending to be prediction. They're your preferences masquerading as requirements. And when you treat them as anything more than what they are, temporary mental constructs, you give them power over your peace of mind. The most liberated people in the world have learned to prefer without expecting. They can want something deeply while being completely okay if it doesn't happen. They can work toward goals without being attached to timelines. They can have standards without demanding that reality meet those standards on their schedule. This isn't about becoming pessimistic or not having goals. It's about holding those goals lightly rather than gripping them desperately. It's about being committed to the process rather than obsessed with specific outcomes. It's about wanting things to work out while being genuinely okay if they work out differently than you planned. When you release expectations, you don't lose motivation. You gain freedom. You're no longer trapped by arbitrary timelines. You've imposed on yourself. You're no longer devastated when people don't read your mind and behave exactly as you hoped. You're no longer thrown off course when circumstances change or challenges arise. Instead, you become curious about what will actually happen rather than stressed about what should happen. You become interested in reality as it unfolds rather than frustrated with reality. As it differs from your fantasy, you become available to opportunities you couldn't see when you were tunnel-visioned on one specific expectation. The person who expects nothing is disappointed by nothing and delighted by everything. They find joy in surprises because they weren't demanding that life be predictable. They find strength in challenges because they weren't expecting everything to be easy. They find wisdom in setbacks because they weren't demanding that everything go according to plan. But releasing expectations doesn't mean having no standards or accepting mediocrity. It means separating your standards for yourself from your demands on reality. You can maintain high standards for your own behavior, effort, and integrity while releasing demands about how quickly things should progress, how people should respond, or how circumstances should unfold. The difference between a standard and an expectation is crucial. A standard is internal. It's about how you choose to show up regardless of external circumstances. An expectation is external. It's about how you demand the world shows up for you. Standards empower you because they're within your control. Expectations disempower you because they're about things beyond your control. You can have the standard of always doing your best work without the expectation that your best work will always be immediately recognized. You can have the standard of treating people with respect without the expectation that they'll always treat you the same way. You can have the standard of continuous improvement without the expectation that improvement will happen on your preferred timeline. Most people live their entire lives imprisoned by expectations they're not even aware they have. They expect their partner to be a mind redator. They expect their boss to appreciate them in exactly the way they want to be appreciated. They expect traffic to cooperate with their schedule. They expect technology to work perfectly. They expect their bodies to feel great every day. They expect other people to have the same values, priorities, and communication styles they have. These unconscious expectations create a constant state of low-level frustration because reality rarely cooperates with demands it never agreed to meet. But when you bring these expectations into consciousness, you can examine them. Are they reasonable? Are they helpful? Are they within anyone's actual control? Are they creating suffering without creating benefit? The chains of expectation are often invisible, but they're not unbreakable. Every expectation you release is a step toward freedom. Every demand you drop is a weight off your shoulders. Every should you let go of is space you create for what actually is. And what actually is, when you're not busy fighting it, is often far more interesting, useful, and beautiful than anything you could have expected. Chapter 6. The Art of Emotional Detachment. Most people confuse emotional detachment with emotional numbness. And this confusion keeps them trapped in cycles of reactive suffering. They think that to be detached means to not feel, to not care, to become some kind of robotic version of themselves. But true emotional detachment is the opposite of numbness. It's the ultimate emotional intelligence. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't feel emotions. It means you feel them without being controlled by them. It means you experience them without identifying with them. It means you acknowledge them without being defined by them. It's the difference between saying I am angry and I am experiencing anger. One makes you the emotion. The other makes you the observer of the emotion. When you're emotionally attached, you're at the mercy of every feeling that arises. Someone criticizes you and you're devastated. Someone ignores you and you're furious. Something doesn't go according to plan and you're anxious. You're like a leaf blown around by every emotional wind with no stability, no center, no capacity to respond rather than react. But when you develop emotional detachment, you become like a mountain. The storms of emotion can rage around you, but they don't move you. You feel the rain of sadness, the lightning of anger, the wind of fear, but you remain grounded in your deeper self. You experience the weather without becoming the weather. This isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. Suppression is the opposite of detachment. When you suppress an emotion, you're still controlled by it, just in a different way. You're using enormous energy to push it down, to hide from it, to avoid feeling it. This creates internal pressure that eventually explodes in unhealthy ways. Detachment is about feeling the emotion fully while maintaining your perspective about it. It's about experiencing anger without becoming an angry person. It's about feeling fear without making fear-based decisions. It's about acknowledging sadness without letting sadness define your reality. The key to emotional detachment is understanding that emotions are temporary visitors, not permanent residents. They arise, peak, and pass away if you let them. But most people don't let them. They grab onto emotions and hold them, especially negative ones. They replay the situation that triggered the anger. They ruminate on the thoughts that created the anxiety. They feed the emotions with attention and story until a temporary feeling becomes a persistent state. Emotional detachment is the practice of experiencing emotions without feeding them. You feel the anger, acknowledge it, perhaps even thank it for the information it's providing about your boundaries or values. And then you let it move through you. You don't suppress it, but you also don't indulge it. You treat it like weather, something to be aware of, but not something to be controlled by. This practice revolutionizes your relationships. When someone says something that normally would trigger you, you can feel the trigger without being triggered. You can notice the emotional reaction arising without having to act on it. You can respond from your wisdom rather than react from your wounds. You can stay present with the person instead of disappearing into your emotional story about what just happened. It also revolutionizes your decision M. When you're emotionally detached, you can feel fear without being paralyzed by it. You can acknowledge anxiety without letting it stop you from taking necessary risks. You can experience excitement without making impulsive decisions. You can feel love without becoming possessive or desperate. The practice of emotional detachment begins with awareness. Most people are so identified with their emotions that they don't even notice when they're having them. They just suddenly find themselves angry, sad, or anxious without any conscious recognition of the transition. Developing emotional awareness is like developing an early warning system that alerts you when emotions are arising. Once you're aware of emotions as they arise, the next step is to create space between you and the emotion. This space can be as simple as taking 3 deep breaths before responding to something that triggered you. It can be saying to yourself, "I notice I'm feeling angry right now," instead of, "I am angry." It can be asking yourself, what would be the wise response here? Instead of just reacting automatically. The space between stimulus and response is where your freedom lives. When you react immediately to emotional triggers, you're not free. You're just a biological machine running unconscious programs. But when you create space, when you pause, when you choose your response rather than just reacting, you reclaim your power. Emotional detachment also means releasing the need for your emotions to be validated by others. You don't need people to agree that you have a right to be angry. You don't need them to understand why you're sad. You don't need them to fix your anxiety. Your emotions are your responsibility, your experience, your information system. When you stop needing external validation for your internal experience, you become emotionally self-sufficient. This doesn't make you cold or uncaring. If anything, it makes you more capable of genuine caring because you're no longer so caught up in your own emotional drama that you can't see other people clearly. When you're not desperately trying to manage your own emotional reactions, you have space to actually be present with others in theirs. Emotional detachment is one of the most powerful forms of letting go because emotions are one of the primary ways we stay attached to outcomes, to people, to situations that aren't serving us. When you can feel without clinging, experience without being controlled, acknowledge without being defined, you gain a level of inner freedom that makes everything else in life easier. The goal isn't to become emotionally numb. The goal is to become emotionally intelligent, to feel deeply while thinking clearly, to experience fully while remaining centered, to be human while staying wise, to care without being controlled by your caring. Chapter 7. Releasing the need to be right. There's a war happening in most people's minds every day. And it's not the war you think it is. It's not the war between good and evil, or success and failure, or love and fear. It's the war between being right and being effective. And most people choose being right every single time, even when it destroys their relationships, limits their growth, and keeps them stuck in patterns that don't serve them. The need to be right is one of the most insidious forms of attachment because it disguises itself as virtue. It feels good to be right. It feels important. It feels like you're standing up for truth, for justice, for what matters. But underneath this noble facade is usually just ego. The desperate need to protect your self-image, to avoid the discomfort of being wrong, to maintain the illusion that you know more than you actually do. Being right becomes an addiction. Every time you prove someone else wrong, you get a hit of superiority. Every time you defend your position successfully, you feel a surge of validation. Every time you resist admitting you were mistaken, you maintain the comfortable illusion that you're smarter, better informed, more logical than the people around you. But like all addictions, this one comes with a devastating cost. The cost of needing to be right is that you stop learning. When you're more committed to defending your position than to discovering the truth, you become closed to new information. You filter out data that contradicts your beliefs. You dismiss perspectives that challenge your assumptions. You surround yourself with people who agree with you and avoid those who might expand your thinking. This creates what psychologists call confirmation bias. The tendency to seek out information that confirms what you already believe while ignoring information that contradicts it. You're not actually thinking anymore. You're just collecting evidence to support predetermined conclusions. You're not growing. You're just reinforcing existing limitations. The need to be right also destroys relationships. Think about the last argument you had with someone close to you. How much of that argument was really about solving the problem and how much was about proving you were right? How much energy went into understanding their perspective and how much went into defending your own? How much focus was on finding a solution that worked for both of you and how much was on winning? When you're attached to being right, you can't really listen to other people. You're too busy formulating your rebuttal to actually hear what they're saying. You're too invested in your own perspective to genuinely consider theirs. You turn conversations into competitions and relationships into battlegrounds where someone has to lose for you to win. But here's what most people don't realize. You can be right and still be wrong. You can have all the facts on your side and still be approaching the situation in a way that doesn't work. You can win the argument and lose the relationship. You can prove your point and miss the point entirely. The most successful people in the world have learned to hold their opinions lightly. They have strong beliefs, but they're not attached to those beliefs. They're committed to what works, not to what they've always thought. They're interested in results, not in being right. And this flexibility, this willingness to be wrong is what allows them to adapt, grow, and succeed where more rigid people fail. Steve Jobs was famous for changing his mind completely when presented with better information. He would argue passionately for one approach in a meeting, then completely reverse his position if someone showed him a better way. He wasn't wishy-washy. He was committed to the best idea, regardless of whose idea it was, or whether it contradicted what he'd said before. This is the difference between strong opinions loosely held and weak opinions tightly held. Weak people cling to their opinions because those opinions are part of their identity. Strong people hold their opinions lightly because their identity is based on something deeper than being right about any particular issue. Releasing the need to be right doesn't mean becoming wishy-washy or having no convictions. It means being more committed to truth than to your current understanding of truth. It means being more interested in what works than in what you've always believed. It means being willing to be wrong about small things so you can be right about big things. The practice of releasing this need begins with curiosity. Instead of trying to prove your point, try to understand the other person's point. Instead of defending your position, explore whether there might be a better position. Instead of being the person who knows, be the person who learns. It also means developing comfort with the phrase, "I don't know." Most people are terrified of admitting ignorance because they think it makes them look weak or stupid. But actually, admitting what you don't know is a sign of wisdom and strength. It shows you're more committed to truth than to appearing smart. It opens up space for learning that doesn't exist when you're pretending to know everything. Another powerful practice is arguing the opposite side of your position. Take something you believe strongly and try to make the best possible case against it. This isn't about changing your mind. It's about understanding your mind. It's about seeing the limitations of your perspective and the validity in other perspectives. When you release the need to be right, you don't become wrong. You become curious. You don't lose your convictions. You deepen them by testing them against reality. You don't become weak. You become flexible. And flexibility, not rigidity, is what allows you to navigate an uncertain world successfully. The truth is, most of the things you think you're right about don't actually matter. They're just opinions, preferences, perspectives that feel important because your ego is invested in them. But the energy you spend defending these positions is energy you could be using to learn, grow, create, and connect with others. Being right is overrated. Being effective is underrated. Being curious is revolutionary. And being willing to be wrong is the foundation of being truly intelligent. Chapter 8. The Freedom of Non-Resistance. Resistance is the root of all psychological suffering. Not pain. Pain is inevitable, not difficulty. Difficulty is part of life, not challenges. Challenges are opportunities for growth. Resistance is what you add to these natural experiences that transforms them from temporary discomfort into persistent suffering. Every moment you spend fighting against what is happening is a moment stolen from dealing with what is happening. Every ounce of energy you invest in wishing things were different is energy not available for working with things as they are. Every thought you think about how unfair, wrong or terrible your current situation is keeps you trapped in that situation instead of moving beyond it. Resistance feels productive because it feels like you're doing something about your problems. It feels important because it feels like you're standing up for yourself. It feels necessary because accepting your situation feels like giving up. But resistance is not action. It's the opposite of action. It's mental and emotional paralysis disguised as righteous indignation. Think about the last time you were stuck in traffic. The traffic existed whether you resisted it or not. Your resistance didn't make the cars move faster. It didn't make your commute shorter. It didn't solve the problem. All it did was add psychological suffering to a neutral situation. You took a simple delay and turned it into a personal offense against the universe. This same pattern plays out in every area of life. Your job has certain frustrating aspects. Your relationships have certain challenging dynamics. Your body has certain limitations. Your financial situation has certain constraints. These things exist as facts, as data points, as current reality. Resistance doesn't change these facts. It just makes experiencing them more painful. Non-resistance doesn't mean passive acceptance of everything. It doesn't mean never trying to improve your situation or change what isn't working. It means stopping the mental and emotional war against what is so you can clearly see what can be done about it. It means accepting current reality as the starting point for creating a different reality. When you stop resisting what is, you free up enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy. Energy that was tied up in internal conflict becomes available for external action. Clarity that was clouded by emotional reactivity becomes sharp and focused. Creativity that was blocked by rigid thinking becomes fluid and innovative. The practice of non-resistance begins with awareness of when you're resisting. Most people resist so automatically that they don't even notice they're doing it. They just live in a constant state of low-level frustration, stress, and dissatisfaction without recognizing that this state is self-created through resistance. Notice when you're thinking thoughts like "this shouldn't be happening. This isn't fair. This is wrong. Why me?" These thoughts are flags that indicate resistance. They're signs that you're fighting against reality rather than working with it. They're symptoms of the mental disease that creates suffering when none needs to exist. When you catch yourself in resistance, the first step is simply to acknowledge it. Say to yourself, "I notice I'm resisting what's happening right now." Don't judge the resistance or try to stop it immediately. Just observe it with curiosity. Notice how it feels in your body. Notice what thoughts are fueling it. Notice how it affects your ability to think clearly and act effectively. The next step is to practice the phrase "what is." This isn't a philosophical statement about determinism or fate. It's a practical recognition that fighting against current reality is futile and counterproductive. Your car breaking down is what's happening. Your boss being difficult is what's happening. Your relationship having problems is what's happening. These things are true whether you resist them or not. From this place of non-resistance, you can ask more useful questions. Instead of "why is this happening to me?" you can ask "what can I learn from this?" Instead of "this shouldn't be happening," you can ask "how can I best respond to what is happening?" Instead of "this is terrible," you can ask what opportunities might exist within this challenge. Non-resistance doesn't make you passive. It makes you responsive. When you're not wasting energy fighting against current circumstances, you have more energy available to navigate through them. When you're not clouded by emotional reactivity, you can see possibilities that were invisible when you were caught up in resistance. The deepest form of non-resistance is accepting that life includes difficulty, uncertainty, and situations beyond your control. Most people resist this basic fact of existence. They think that if they just work hard enough, plan well enough, or control enough variables, they can create a life without problems. But this expectation itself creates resistance to the natural flow of life. When you truly accept that challenges are part of the human experience, you stop being surprised by them. When you accept that uncertainty is the only certainty, you stop being thrown off by the unexpected. When you accept that some things are beyond your control, you stop wasting energy trying to control them. This acceptance doesn't make you a victim of circumstances. It makes you a master of your responses to circumstances. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control what happens in you. You can't eliminate difficulty from your life, but you can eliminate resistance to difficulty. You can't make life perfectly predictable, but you can become perfectly adaptable. The freedom of non-resistance is the freedom to experience life as it is rather than suffering over how you think it should be. It's the freedom to move with the current instead of exhausting yourself swimming against it. It's the freedom to find peace within any storm because you're no longer fighting the storm. You're dancing with it. When you truly understand non-resistance, you realize that most of your problems aren't actually problems. They're just situations that you've decided to resist. And the moment you stop resisting, the problem often dissolves, leaving only a situation that can be navigated, learned from, or transcended. Chapter 9. Mastering the Art of Flow. Flow is what happens when resistance disappears and you align with the natural rhythm of life. It's the state athletes call being in the zone, where performance becomes effortless and time seems to either slow down or speed up. It's what musicians experience when they're so absorbed in playing that the boundary between them and the music dissolves. It's what you feel when you're so engaged in an activity that self-consciousness vanishes and you become one with what you're doing. Most people experience flow accidentally and rarely. They remember moments when everything seemed to click, when they felt completely alive and engaged, when challenges felt exciting rather than overwhelming. But they don't understand how to access this state consistently because they don't understand what creates it or what blocks it. Flow is your natural state when you're not interfering with yourself. It's what emerges when you stop trying to control outcomes and start trusting the process. It's what happens when you release the internal resistance that creates friction and struggle. It's what flows naturally when you get out of your own way. The biggest obstacle to flow is self-consciousness. The part of your mind that's constantly monitoring, judging, and commenting on your performance. This internal critic creates a split between the doer and the observer, between the self that's engaged in the activity and the self that's watching and evaluating. This split creates friction, tension, and the kind of mental noise that blocks flow. When you're in flow, this split disappears. There's no separate self watching and judging. There's just pure engagement, total absorption, complete presence. You're not thinking about how you're doing. You're just doing. You're not worried about the outcome. You're completely focused on the process. You're not trying to perform. You're simply performing. This state is accessible to anyone in any activity. But it requires specific conditions. First, the challenge level must match your skill level. If the challenge is too easy, you become bored. If it's too difficult, you become anxious. Flow happens in the sweet spot where the challenge stretches you just enough to require your full attention without overwhelming your capabilities. Second, you need clear goals and immediate feedback. Flow requires knowing what you're trying to accomplish and being able to tell moment by moment whether you're succeeding. This doesn't mean the goals have to be externally imposed or that the feedback has to come from others, but there needs to be some way to gauge progress and adjust course in real time. Third, you need complete concentration. Flow is impossible when your attention is scattered or divided. It requires bringing all of your focus to the present moment and the task at hand. This means eliminating distractions both external and internal. It means training your mind to be fully where you are instead of somewhere else. The practice of cultivating flow begins with choosing activities that naturally engage you. What kinds of tasks or challenges draw you in so completely that you lose track of time? What activities make you feel most alive and energized? What kinds of work feel more like play? These are clues to your personal flow triggers. Once you've identified potential flow activities, you can structure them to maximize the conditions for flow. Adjust the difficulty level to match your current abilities. Set clear, specific goals for each session. Create an environment that minimizes distractions. Develop rituals that help you transition into focused attention. But the deeper practice of flow is learning to bring this quality of engagement to ordinary activities. Flow isn't just for special moments or peak experiences. It's available in washing dishes, having conversations, writing emails, or any other activity. When you bring your full presence to it, the key is shifting from performance mode to presence mode. In performance mode, you're focused on results, outcomes, how you're being perceived. In presence mode, you're focused on the experience itself, the process, the moment-by-moment unfolding of the activity. Performance mode creates pressure and self-consciousness. Presence mode creates flow. This shift requires letting go of the need to look good, to impress others, to prove yourself. It requires releasing attachment to specific outcomes and embracing the uncertainty of not knowing how things will turn out. It requires trusting that when you show up fully to the process, the results will take care of themselves. Flow also requires accepting that mistakes and setbacks are part of the process rather than threats to be avoided. When you're afraid of making mistakes, you hold back. You hesitate. You second-guess yourself. This creates the very tension and self-consciousness that blocks flow. But when you accept mistakes as information and learning opportunities, you can stay engaged and present even when things don't go as planned. The state of flow is inherently letting go. You let go of trying to control the experience and allow it to unfold naturally. You let go of judging your performance and simply perform. You let go of thinking about the future or the past and immerse yourself completely in the present. You let go of the small self that's worried about looking good and connect with the larger self that simply wants to express and create. When you master the art of flow, life becomes easier and more enjoyable. Work feels less like work. Challenges feel less like threats. Time feels more flexible. Energy feels more renewable. You realize that struggle and effort are often signs that you're fighting against the natural flow rather than moving with it. Flow is not a luxury or a special privilege. It's your birthright. It's the way you're designed to operate when you're not interfering with your own natural functioning. It's what emerges when you stop trying so hard and start trusting more. It's what happens when you release the grip of control and allow yourself to be carried by the current of life. Chapter 10. The Power of Present Moment Awareness. The present moment is the only place where life actually exists. Yet most people spend almost no time there. They live in their thoughts about the past, replaying conversations, analyzing mistakes, reliving old hurts. Or they live in their thoughts about the future, worrying about what might happen, planning for contingencies, trying to predict and control outcomes that may never occur. Meanwhile, the only moment where they actually have any power slips by unnoticed. This constant mental time travel isn't just a harmless distraction. It's the source of most psychological suffering. When you're thinking about the past, you often experience regret, resentment, or nostalgia, emotions about things that no longer exist. When you're thinking about the future, you often experience anxiety, anticipation, or worry. Emotions about things that don't yet exist and may never exist. Either way, you're suffering over things that aren't actually happening right now. The present moment, by contrast, is almost always manageable. Right now, as you're reading this, you're probably not in any immediate danger. You're not facing any crisis that requires urgent action. You have air to breathe, a place to sit or stand, the ability to see these words. The present moment, stripped of the stories your mind tells about it, is usually neutral or even pleasant. But your mind rarely lets you experience the present moment directly. It's constantly interpreting, analyzing, comparing, judging. It takes the simple experience of now and layers it with meaning, context, implications, and emotional reactions. It turns a moment of sitting quietly into a story about how you should be doing something more productive. It turns a conversation with a friend into an analysis of what they really meant and how you should have responded differently. Present moment awareness is the practice of experiencing life directly rather than through the filter of mental commentary. It's the ability to be here now without the constant narration, interpretation, and evaluation that usually accompanies experience. It's the skill of pure perception, of simply being with what is without, immediately needing to understand, categorize, or change it. This isn't about emptying your mind or stopping all thoughts. That's neither possible nor necessary. It's about changing your relationship to thoughts and mental activity. Instead of being consumed by thoughts, you become aware of them. Instead of believing every thought that arises, you observe them with curiosity and discernment. Instead of being lost in mental stories, you recognize them as mental activity rather than reality. The practice begins with simply noticing when you're not present. Most people are so habitually lost in thought that they don't even realize they've left the present moment. They're physically here, but mentally somewhere else, running on autopilot while their minds churn through endless streams of internal dialogue. Start paying attention to where your mind goes. Notice when you're replaying yesterday's meeting instead of experiencing today's weather. Notice when you're worrying about next week's presentation instead of tasting your current meal. Notice when you're analyzing your relationship instead of enjoying your partner's presence. Simply becoming aware of mental time travel is the first step towards spending more time in the present. When you catch your mind wandering, don't judge it or try to force it back. Simply acknowledge where it went and gently return your attention to the present moment. You can anchor your awareness in physical sensations, the feeling of your feet on the ground, the rhythm of your breathing, the temperature of the air on your skin. These physical anchors are always available and always happening. Now you can also use your senses as gateways to presence. What do you actually see right now? Not what you think about what you see, but the raw visual data. What do you hear without labeling or interpreting the sounds? What do you smell, taste, or feel without immediately creating a story about these sensations? Present moment awareness dissolves many forms of suffering because most suffering exists in the gap between what is and what you think should be. When you're fully present, there's no gap. There's just what is. There's no resistance because resistance requires a story about why what's happening shouldn't be happening. There's no anxiety because anxiety requires projecting current concerns into imaginary futures. This doesn't mean becoming passive or stopping all planning and reflection. Present moment awareness actually makes thinking more effective because you can choose when to think rather than being at the mercy of compulsive mental activity. You can engage with thoughts about the past when that's useful and practical. Then return to the present. You can plan for the future when planning is called for. Then come back to now. The quality of your life is determined by the quality of your presence. When you're truly present, ordinary experiences become extraordinary. A simple conversation becomes deeply meaningful. A walk in nature becomes profoundly peaceful. Even mundane activities like washing dishes or folding laundry can become meditative and satisfying when you bring your full attention to them. Present moment awareness also enhances your effectiveness because you can only take action in the present. All the thinking about what you should have done differently or what you need to do later is just mental activity. Action happens now. Decisions happen now. Life happens now. When you're present, you're available to life. When you're lost in thought, you're missing it. The deepest letting go is letting go of the compulsive need to be somewhere other than where you are, sometime other than now, someone other than who you are in this moment. Present moment awareness is the practice of being fully here, fully now, fully yourself. Without resistance or reservation. It's the foundation of all peace, all wisdom, all genuine happiness. When you master present moment awareness, you realize that you've been searching everywhere for what was available all along. The peace you seek, the fulfillment you crave, the aliveness you desire, it's all here now, waiting for you to arrive. Chapter 11. Transforming relationships through detachment. Every relationship in your life is shaped by your level of attachment and need for control. The tighter you grip, the more distance you create. The more you try to change someone, the more they resist changing. The more you need them to be different than they are, the less capable you become of loving who they actually are. This isn't a philosophical concept. It's practical psychology that plays out in every interaction you have. Most people approach relationships with an unconscious agenda. They want their partner to make them feel secure, loved, and validated. They want their friends to always be available and supportive. They want their family members to approve of their choices and understand their perspective. They want their colleagues to appreciate their contributions and treat them with respect. These wants seem reasonable, even natural, but they transform relationships from connections into contracts. When you enter a relationship with an agenda, you're not really seeing the other person. You're seeing your needs, your expectations, your projections of what they should provide for you. You're relating to your idea of who they should be rather than accepting who they actually are. This creates a fundamental dishonesty in the relationship because you're pretending to love them while actually trying to change them. The paradox of relationships is that the more you need someone to be different, the less likely they are to change in the direction you want. People can sense when they're being manipulated, controlled, or conditionally accepted, even when it's done with good intentions. This sensing creates resistance, defensiveness, and often rebellion against the very changes you're hoping to see. But when you practice detachment in relationships, something remarkable happens. You stop trying to get something from the other person and start simply enjoying who they are. You stop needing them to validate you and start validating yourself. You stop requiring them to make you happy and start taking responsibility for your own happiness. This shift transforms the entire dynamic. Detachment in relationships doesn't mean not caring. It means caring without clinging. It means loving without possessing. It means supporting without rescuing. It means being present without being needy. It means offering yourself fully while expecting nothing in return. This might sound like a recipe for being taken advantage of. But actually, it's the foundation of the most fulfilling relationships possible. When you're detached, you can love people for who they are rather than for what they do for you. You can appreciate their unique qualities instead of focusing on how they fall short of your expectations. You can support their growth without trying to direct it. You can enjoy their presence without desperately needing their attention. You can care about their well-being without taking responsibility for their choices. This shift requires releasing several common relationship patterns. First, you have to release the need to be right in every disagreement. Most relationship conflicts aren't really about the surface issue being discussed. They're about the underlying need to be seen, heard, understood, and validated. When you stop needing to win arguments and start seeking to understand perspectives, conflicts transform from battles into opportunities for deeper connection. Second, you have to release the need to fix or save the other person. Many people are attracted to relationships where they can play the role of rescuer, helper, or teacher. This feels good to the ego because it creates a sense of being needed and superior. But it also creates dependency and resentment. True love means trusting people to handle their own lives, learn their own lessons, and make their own mistakes. Third, you have to release the need for constant reassurance and validation. When your sense of worth depends on how others treat you, you become emotionally needy and exhausting to be around. You read into every word, analyze every gesture, and constantly seek proof that you're loved and accepted. This neediness pushes people away because it makes the relationship feel like work rather than joy. Fourth, you have to release the need to control how the relationship unfolds. You can't force intimacy, manufacture chemistry, or guarantee that someone will love you the way you want to be loved. Relationships have their own organic timing and development. Trying to accelerate or control this process usually backfires by creating pressure and artificial dynamics. Detached love is unconditional love, but not in the way most people understand that term. It doesn't mean accepting abuse or staying in harmful situations. It means loving without conditions about how the other person should behave, think, or feel. It means caring about their well-being without needing them to care about yours in exactly the same way. It means wanting them to be happy even if their happiness doesn't include you. This level of detachment requires tremendous inner security. You have to be so grounded in your own worth that you don't need external validation to feel valuable. You have to be so comfortable with yourself that you don't need others to complete you. You have to be so confident in your ability to handle whatever happens that you don't need guarantees about how relationships will unfold. But when you achieve this level of detachment, your relationships become effortless and joyful. You stop working so hard to make them work and start enjoying them as they are. You stop trying to get love and start giving love freely. You stop being afraid of losing people and start being grateful for whatever time you have with them. Detached relationships are also more honest because you're not pretending to be someone you're not to get approval or avoid rejection. You can show up authentically because you're not desperately needing the other person to respond in a particular way. You can speak your truth because you're not attached to them agreeing with it. You can set boundaries because you're not afraid of their reaction. The people who love you when you're detached are the people who actually love you. The people who only stay around when you're giving them what they want or being who they want you to be aren't really in relationship with you. They're in relationship with what you provide or how you make them feel. Detachment helps you distinguish between genuine connection and transactional relationship. This doesn't happen overnight. Learning to love without attachment goes against most of your conditioning about what love means and how relationships should work. It requires consistent practice, ongoing self-awareness, and the willingness to feel the discomfort of not getting your needs met in the ways you expect. But the freedom that comes from detached relationships is extraordinary. You're no longer walking on eggshells trying to manage other people's emotions or constantly worrying about whether you're loved enough. You're no longer exhausted by the effort of trying to control how others feel about you. You're no longer devastated when people don't meet your expectations because you've stopped having expectations about how they should show up. Instead, you're free to love purely, give generously, and connect authentically. You're available to appreciate people for who they are, rather than disappointed by who they're not. You're able to enjoy relationships without needing them to be different than they are. You've discovered that the love you were seeking from others was always available from within yourself. Chapter 12. Letting Go of Past Wounds and Future Fears. Your past is a story you tell yourself about events that have already happened. Your future is a story you tell yourself about events that haven't happened yet and may never happen. Both stories exist only in your mind. Yet they have more power over your present experience than the actual reality occurring right now. This is the tragedy of human consciousness. Being so lost in mental time travel that you miss the only life you actually have. The past seems real because you have memories of it. But memories aren't recordings of what happened. They're reconstructions influenced by your current state of mind, your beliefs about yourself, and the meaning you've assigned to various experiences. Every time you remember something, you slightly alter the memory. Every time you tell the story of what happened to you, you reinforce a particular interpretation of events that may have little to do with what actually occurred. Most people carry wounds from their past like treasured possessions. They've told the story of how they were hurt, betrayed, abandoned, or traumatized so many times that the story has become part of their identity. They know exactly who wronged them when it happened and why it still affects them today. They've built a case for their suffering that's so compelling they can't imagine who they would be without it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Holding on to past wounds doesn't protect you from future hurt. It doesn't make you stronger or wiser or more compassionate. It doesn't honor your experience or validate your pain. All it does is keep you trapped in a version of yourself that was created by circumstances that no longer exist, responding to threats that are no longer present, defending against attacks that ended long ago. Every moment you spend reliving past trauma is a moment you're not available to present opportunity. Every ounce of energy you invest in maintaining old resentments is energy not available for creating new experiences. Every thought you think about what someone did to you is a thought not focused on what you're doing for yourself. This doesn't mean denying that painful things happened or pretending that trauma doesn't have real effects. It means recognizing that what happened to you is not the same as who you are. It means understanding that your past experiences, no matter how significant, don't have to determine your future possibilities. It means choosing to be shaped by your wisdom rather than defined by your wounds. The process of letting go of past wounds begins with understanding the difference between remembering and reliving. Remembering is acknowledging that something happened without becoming emotionally re-engaged with it. Reliving is bringing the emotional charge of past events into the present moment as if they were happening now. Most people think they're just remembering, but they're actually reliving the same emotional experience over and over again. When you relive past trauma, you're not processing it or healing from it. You're reinforcing the neural pathways that created the trauma response in the first place. You're training your nervous system to remain in a state of hypervigilance, defensiveness, and reactivity. You're keeping yourself stuck in victim consciousness long after the victimization has ended. True healing happens when you can remember what happened without being emotionally hijacked by the memory. It happens when you can acknowledge the impact of past events without being controlled by them. It happens when you can learn from difficult experiences without being defined by them. This doesn't happen through denial or suppression. It happens through conscious processing and deliberate release. One of the most powerful tools for releasing past wounds is forgiveness. But not the kind of forgiveness most people think about. Most people think forgiveness means condoning what happened, excusing the other person's behavior, or pretending that harmful actions were acceptable. But true forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person and everything to do with your own freedom. Forgiveness is the recognition that holding on to resentment hurts you more than it hurts anyone else. It's the understanding that your anger doesn't punish the person who wronged you. It punishes you by keeping you emotionally connected to someone or something you want to be free from. It's the choice to stop giving your power to past events and the people involved in them. This kind of forgiveness is ultimately selfish in the best possible way. You're not forgiving others for their sake. You're forgiving them for your sake. You're not releasing resentment to be noble. You're releasing it to be free. You're not letting go of anger to be spiritual. You're letting go of anger to be effective in your current life. Just as powerful as releasing past wounds is releasing future fears. Fear about what might happen is even more irrational than resentment about what did happen because at least past events actually occurred. Future fears are usually about scenarios that will never come to pass, problems that will never manifest, and catastrophes that exist only in your imagination. Most anxiety is not about current danger. It's about imaginary future danger. Most worry is not about real problems. It's about problems you think you might have someday. Most stress is not about what's happening now. It's about what you're afraid might happen later. You're literally suffering over things that don't exist and may never exist. The mind creates future fears as a misguided attempt to prepare for and prevent problems. It thinks that if you worry enough about potential negative outcomes, you'll be better equipped to handle them if they occur. But worry doesn't prepare you for challenges. It depletes the mental and emotional resources you would need to handle challenges effectively. Future fears also create a self-fulfilling prophecy effect. When you're constantly worried about negative outcomes, you make decisions from a place of fear rather than wisdom. You avoid opportunities because you're focused on what could go wrong. You hold back from taking risks because you're imagining worst-case scenarios. You approach life defensively rather than proactively. Releasing future fears doesn't mean being naive about potential challenges or failing to plan for contingencies. It means distinguishing between useful preparation and useless worry. Useful preparation involves taking concrete actions based on realistic assessments of potential challenges. Useless worry involves creating elaborate mental scenarios about unlikely disasters and then suffering over these imaginary problems. The practice of letting go of past wounds and future fears is really the practice of coming home to the present moment. The past exists as memory, which is fine. The future exists as possibility, which is also fine. But your life exists as present experience. And that's where your power lies. When you're not carrying the emotional weight of past wounds, you're lighter, more flexible, more responsive to current opportunities. When you're not burdened by anxiety about future fears, you're more creative, more decisive, more willing to take the risks that lead to growth and success. When you're focused on the present moment, you're actually living instead of just thinking about living. This requires daily practice because the mind's tendency to ruminate about the past and worry about the future is deeply ingrained. You have to consistently catch yourself when you drift into mental time travel and gently return your attention to what's happening now. You have to repeatedly choose present awareness over past regret and future anxiety. But every moment you spend fully present is a moment of freedom. Every wound you release creates space for wisdom. Every fear you let go creates room for possibility. You begin to realize that most of your suffering was optional, created by your attachment to stories about events that weren't actually happening in the present moment. The person you become when you're not weighed down by past wounds and future fears is lighter, more joyful, more effective, and more alive. You discover that underneath all the mental drama about what was and what might be, there's a deeper self that's perfectly fine right now. This self doesn't need the past to be different or the future to be guaranteed. This self is available to life as it's actually unfolding moment by moment, breath by breath. Chapter 13. The Liberation of Non-Identification. Who you think you are is not who you actually are. The person you believe yourself to be with all their history, limitations, preferences, and characteristics is just a story, a collection of thoughts and memories that you've mistaken for your true identity. This misidentification is one of the most fundamental sources of human suffering and the greatest barrier to genuine freedom. Most people are completely identified with their thoughts, emotions, body roles, and personal history. They think I am angry instead of anger is arising. They think I am a failure instead of I had an experience of failing at something. They think I am old instead of this body is aging. They think I am my job instead of I perform a certain function for income. This identification creates a rigid sense of self that's constantly threatened and needs constant defense. When you're identified with your thoughts, you have to defend your opinions as if they were parts of your body. When you're identified with your emotions, you become their victim rather than their observer. When you're identified with your roles, you lose touch with your essence underneath those roles. When you're identified with your past, you become trapped in outdated versions of yourself. This identification creates what psychologists call the ego, not in the Freudian sense, but in the spiritual and psychological sense of a false self that's constructed from mental concepts rather than grounded in authentic being. The ego is always under threat because it's built on thoughts and ideas that can be challenged, changed, or contradicted by reality. The ego needs constant validation because it's not actually real. It needs to be right because being wrong threatens its existence. It needs to be special because ordinariness suggests it's not important. It needs to be in control because uncertainty reveals its powerlessness. It needs to be permanent because change threatens its continuity. These needs create the endless seeking, striving, and struggling that characterize most people's lives. But underneath this constructed identity is your true self, the awareness that observes thoughts without being thoughts. The consciousness that experiences emotions without being emotions. The being that exists independently of any mental content or external circumstances. This true self is always present, always stable, always at peace because it's not dependent on anything that can be gained or lost. The practice of non-identification is learning to recognize yourself as the observer rather than the observed. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that notices thoughts arising and passing away. You are not your emotions. You are the space in which emotions appear and dissolve. You are not your body. You are the consciousness that inhabits the body. You are not your roles. You are the being that plays various roles. This shift in identification is perhaps the most radical and liberating realization possible. When you recognize yourself as pure awareness, you become unshakable. Because awareness itself cannot be threatened. Thoughts may be criticized, but awareness cannot be criticized. Emotions may be uncomfortable, but awareness is never disturbed by what it observes. Bodies may die, but awareness is timeless. Roles may change, but the one who plays the roles remains constant. Non-identification doesn't mean becoming disconnected from life or losing your personality. It means recognizing that your personality is something you have, not something you are. It means understanding that your thoughts are mental events you experience, not the core of your being. It means seeing that your emotions are energy patterns that move through you, not your essential nature. When you're not identified with your thoughts, you can think more clearly because you're not emotionally attached to your thinking. When you're not identified with your emotions, you can feel them fully without being overwhelmed by them. When you're not identified with your roles, you can play them more effectively because you're not trapped by them. When you're not identified with your past, you can learn from it without being limited by it. This liberation allows you to respond to life from your deepest wisdom rather than react from your conditioned patterns. You can make decisions based on what's actually needed in the situation rather than what your ego thinks it needs to maintain its image. You can love others without the desperate need to be loved in return because your sense of worth isn't dependent on external validation. The practice of non-identification begins with self-observation. Start noticing the difference between the thinker and the thoughts, the feeler and the feelings, the actor and the actions. Begin to recognize the awareness that's present during all experiences, but isn't itself an experience. This awareness is always here, always now, always perfectly fine, regardless of what's happening in your mental or emotional world. When strong emotions arise, practice saying fear is present, instead of I am afraid. When thoughts become obsessive, practice observing them like clouds passing through the sky rather than identifying with them. When you're playing a role at work or in relationships, remember that you're playing a role rather than being the role. This isn't about detaching from life or becoming cold and unfailing. It's about engaging with life from a place of freedom rather than compulsion. It's about caring deeply while holding lightly. It's about being fully human while recognizing the divine awareness that makes all human experience possible. Non-identification also dissolves many forms of suffering that depend on a solid sense of self to maintain themselves. Depression often involves identifying completely with negative thoughts about yourself. Anxiety usually involves identifying with fearful thoughts about the future. Anger typically involves identifying with thoughts about how you've been wronged. When you recognize these as mental events rather than truth about who you are, their power to disturb you diminishes dramatically. Perhaps most importantly, non-identification reveals that what you've been seeking outside yourself has been present all along. The peace you've been chasing exists as your fundamental nature. When you're not disturbed by mental content, the love you've been craving is the very nature of the awareness that you are. The freedom you've been pursuing is available the moment you stop identifying with what you are not. This recognition doesn't happen once and then remain permanent. The mind's habit of identification is strong and persistent. You'll find yourself getting caught up in thoughts, emotions, and roles repeatedly. But each time you recognize what's happening and return to identifying with awareness itself, you strengthen your capacity to remain free from the tyranny of false identification. The person who knows themselves as pure awareness lives with an unshakable peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. They can play the game of life fully without taking it so seriously that they lose their essential joy. They can care deeply about outcomes while knowing that their deepest self is untouched by success or failure. They found the ultimate letting go, releasing identification with anything that can be gained or lost, and resting in what they've always been and will always be. Chapter 14. Creating from Emptiness. The greatest creations don't come from fullness. They come from emptiness. Not the emptiness of depression or meaninglessness, but the emptiness of unlimited potential, of infinite possibility, of pure creative space, uncluttered by preconceptions and limitations. This is the emptiness that exists before the first brushstroke, before the first word, before the first note. It's the fertile void from which all genuine creativity emerges. Most people approach creativity from a place of fullness. Fullness of ideas, plans, expectations, and intentions. They think they need to know exactly what they want to create before they begin creating. They believe they need a clear vision, a detailed plan, a guaranteed outcome. But this approach often produces forced, contrived, or derivative work because it's coming from the mind's attempt to control the creative process rather than from the source of true inspiration. Real creativity requires letting go of the need to know what you're creating before you create it. It requires surrendering your preconceptions about what should emerge and allowing what wants to emerge to reveal itself. It requires trusting the creative process more than your ideas about the creative process. It requires becoming empty enough that something genuinely new can come through you. This emptiness isn't passive or lazy. It's actively receptive, dynamically open, intelligently responsive. It's the emptiness of a perfectly tuned instrument waiting to be played, of fertile soil ready to receive seeds, of clear space available for whatever wants to manifest. It's empty of your agenda, but full of potential. When you create from emptiness, you're not trying to express yourself. You're allowing something to express itself through you. You're not imposing your will on the creative medium. You're collaborating with the intelligence that flows through all creative work. You're not manufacturing something from your personal storehouse of ideas. You're serving as a conduit for something larger than your individual consciousness. This requires enormous trust because you're letting go of the illusion that you're in control of the creative process. You're acknowledging that your best ideas don't come from thinking harder, but from thinking less. You're recognizing that your most profound insights don't come from analyzing more, but from analyzing less. You're admitting that your greatest breakthroughs don't come from forcing solutions, but from allowing solutions to arise. The fear of emptiness keeps most people from accessing their deepest creativity. They're afraid that if they let go of their ideas and plans, nothing will come. They're terrified that if they stop trying to be creative, creativity will abandon them. They're convinced that if they're not constantly generating and controlling, they'll be left with nothing to offer. But this fear is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how creativity actually works. True creativity doesn't come from your personal mind trying to produce something new. It comes from your personal mind getting out of the way long enough for the universal creative intelligence to flow through you. Your job isn't to create. It's to remove the obstacles to creation. The primary obstacle to creation is the mind's tendency to judge, compare, and evaluate what's emerging before it's fully emerged. You start writing a sentence and immediately critique it. You begin a painting and instantly compare it to other paintings you've seen. You play a few notes and immediately judge whether they're good enough. This premature evaluation kills creativity in its infancy. Creating from emptiness means suspending judgment during the creative process. It means allowing whatever wants to emerge without immediately evaluating its worth. It means being curious about what's happening rather than critical of what's happening. It means trusting that the time for evaluation will come later after the creative energy has been allowed to express itself fully. This approach revolutionizes not just artistic creativity but every form of innovation and problem solving. When you approach business challenges from emptiness, you're open to solutions you never would have considered from your limited perspective. When you approach relationship difficulties from emptiness, you're available to insights that can't be forced through analysis. When you approach life decisions from emptiness, you're receptive to guidance that doesn't come from mental calculation. Creating from emptiness also means letting go of attachment to outcomes. When you're attached to creating something specific, you limit the creative process to your current understanding and imagination. But when you're open to whatever wants to be created, you make space for possibilities that exceed your current comprehension. You allow for the kind of breakthrough creativity that surprises even you. This doesn't mean being passive or uninvolved in the creative process. Emptiness is not blankness. It's dynamic receptivity that responds intelligently to what's emerging. It's active listening to the creative impulse. It's skillful participation in the dance between intention and surrender, between effort and allowing, between personal will and universal flow. The practice of creating from emptiness begins with learning to be comfortable with not knowing. Most people are so uncomfortable with uncertainty that they fill every space with plans, ideas, and mental activity. But creativity requires leaving space for the unknown to enter. It requires being okay with not knowing what comes next. It requires trusting that not knowing is not a problem to be solved but a doorway to be walked through. You can cultivate this capacity by spending time in actual emptiness. Sitting quietly without agenda, walking without destination, being present without purpose other than being present. This trains your nervous system to be comfortable with open space, with unstructured time, with the fertile void that precedes all genuine creation. When you do engage in creative work, practice beginning from emptiness rather than from ideas. Sit down to write without knowing what you'll write about. Pick up the paintbrush without knowing what you'll paint. Start the conversation without knowing where it will lead. Allow the first moment of creative engagement to inform the second moment and the second to inform the third without imposing a predetermined direction on the process. This approach requires letting go of the need to be original, impressive, or even good. When you're trying to create something that will meet certain standards or achieve certain effects, you're creating from ego rather than emptiness. But when you're simply allowing what wants to emerge, you're creating from source. And what comes from source always has an authenticity and power that can't be manufactured. Creating from emptiness also means letting go of ownership of what you create. The greatest artists, writers, musicians, and innovators often speak of their best work as something that came through them rather than from them. They describe themselves as instruments or channels rather than originators. They recognize that their role is to serve the creative process rather than to control it. When you create from emptiness, you discover that you have access to creativity that far exceeds your personal abilities and knowledge. Ideas come that you didn't think of. Solutions appear that you didn't figure out. Beauty emerges that you didn't manufacture. You realize that creativity isn't a personal resource that can be depleted. It's an unlimited source that flows through you when you're empty enough to receive it. This understanding transforms your relationship to creative work, from struggle to play, from effort to ease, from scarcity to abundance. You stop worrying about running out of ideas because you understand that ideas come from an inexhaustible source. You stop being attached to particular creations because you know that new ones will continue to flow. You stop trying to repeat past successes because you're more interested in what wants to be created now. The emptiness from which true creation emerges is not vacant but pregnant with infinite possibility. It's not lacking but abundantly open. It's not weak but powerfully receptive. When you learn to create from this emptiness, you become a co-creator with the intelligence that shapes universes, paints sunsets, and writes symphonies in the sound of rain. You discover that letting go of your small creative agenda makes space for a creativity that's larger, wiser, and more beautiful than anything you could have planned. Chapter 15. Living in Complete Freedom. Complete freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want whenever you want. That's not freedom. That's license. And it often leads to slavery to your impulses, addictions, and unconscious patterns. True freedom is the liberation from the internal forces that compel you to act against your deeper wisdom. The release from the psychological prison of attachment, resistance, and the desperate need to control what can't be controlled. You achieve complete freedom not by getting what you want but by wanting what is. Not by eliminating all constraints but by choosing your constraints consciously. Not by avoiding all pain but by releasing your resistance to pain. Not by controlling all outcomes but by surrendering your attachment to outcomes. This is the paradox that most people never understand. You become completely free by letting go of your demand for freedom. The person who lives in complete freedom has transcended the tyranny of their own mind. They're no longer enslaved by their thoughts, emotions, desires, or fears. They can think without being controlled by thinking. They can feel without being overwhelmed by feeling. They can want without being desperate for what they want. They can fear without being paralyzed by fear. They've learned to use their mind as a tool rather than being used by their mind as a victim. This freedom doesn't come from changing your external circumstances. Though your external circumstances may change as a result of your internal freedom, it comes from transforming your relationship to whatever circumstances exist. The person who is internally free can be content in a palace or a prison cell because their contentment doesn't depend on external conditions. They found the source of peace, joy, and fulfillment within themselves. Complete freedom means you're no longer trying to escape from your life. You're no longer waiting for better circumstances to be happy. You're no longer postponing your well-being until you get what you think you need. You're no longer seeking fulfillment in achievements, acquisitions, or other people's approval. You've realized that what you've been seeking outside yourself has been available inside yourself all along. This doesn't make you passive or unmotivated. If anything, it makes you more effective because you're acting from inspiration rather than desperation, from wisdom rather than compulsion, from love rather than fear. You can pursue goals without being attached to them. You can work toward outcomes without being controlled by your need for those outcomes. You can care deeply about things without being destroyed if they don't work out as you hoped. The completely free person has learned to find joy in the process rather than only in results. They can enjoy the journey regardless of the destination. They can appreciate what is while working toward what could be. They can be fully present to their current experience while remaining open to new possibilities. They've discovered that happiness is not a goal to be achieved, but a natural state to be uncovered. Living in complete freedom requires releasing all the strategies you've used to try to make yourself feel secure, valuable, and loved. Most people spend their entire lives trying to prove their worth through achievement, accumulation, or approval seeking. But the completely free person has realized that their worth is inherent, not earned. They don't need to prove anything to anyone, including themselves. This recognition eliminates the exhausting effort of trying to be someone other than who you are. You stop trying to impress people, manage their opinions of you, or hide aspects of yourself that you think are unacceptable. You can be authentic because you're not seeking validation. You can be vulnerable because you're not protecting an image. You can be honest because you're not afraid of rejection. Complete freedom also means releasing the need to understand everything, control everything, or have everything work out according to your plans. You become comfortable with mystery, uncertainty, and the unknown. You trust that life is unfolding intelligently even when you can't see the larger pattern. You're willing to not know what comes next because you're confident in your ability to respond wisely to whatever does come next. The free person has made peace with impermanence. They don't suffer over the fact that all things change because they understand that change is the nature of existence. They don't cling to pleasant experiences or resist unpleasant ones because they know that both are temporary. They've learned to flow with the constant flux of life rather than fighting against it. This acceptance of impermanence paradoxically allows you to enjoy life more fully. When you're not trying to make moments last forever, you can be completely present to them while they're happening. When you're not resisting change, you can appreciate the beauty in each phase of life's unfolding. When you're not afraid of endings, you can fully engage with beginnings. Complete freedom is also freedom from the need to be special, important, or significant in the eyes of others. You can be ordinary without feeling diminished. You can live a simple life without feeling like you're missing out. You can contribute to the world without needing recognition for your contributions. You've discovered that true significance comes from being authentically yourself, not from being better than others. The path to complete freedom requires surrendering everything you think you are and everything you think you need. This is terrifying for the ego because it means the death of the false self you've spent your whole life constructing and defending. But this death is not real death. It's awakening to the deathless awareness that you've always been underneath all your identifications and attachments. When you live in complete freedom, every day becomes an adventure because you're not trying to control what happens. Every moment becomes interesting because you're not comparing it to other moments. Every experience becomes valuable because you're not judging whether it's good or bad. Every person becomes fascinating because you're not projecting your needs and expectations onto them. This freedom is available to you right now. It doesn't require years of spiritual practice, extensive therapy, or dramatic life changes. Though any of these might be helpful, it simply requires the recognition that what you've been seeking has never been absent. The peace you crave is present when you stop disturbing it with resistance. The love you desire is available when you stop demanding it from others. The freedom you seek is yours when you stop trying to escape from what is. The completely free person has realized the ultimate truth. There is nothing to get, nowhere to go, no one to become. Everything you need for complete fulfillment is present in this moment when you stop needing this moment to be different than it is. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you present. This doesn't make you resigned. It makes you responsive. This doesn't make you empty. It makes you whole. You are already free. You have always been free. You will always be free. The only thing that creates the experience of bondage is forgetting this truth. The moment you remember who you really are underneath all your stories, identifications, and attachments, you step into the complete freedom that has been waiting for you all along. The prison door was never locked. You were just so busy trying to escape that you never thought to simply open it and walk out. This is the power of letting go. It reveals that what you thought you were holding on to was actually holding on to you. When you release your grip on what you thought you needed for freedom, you discover that freedom was never dependent on anything you could grasp. It's what remains when you stop grasping. It's what emerges when you stop resisting. It's what you are when you stop trying to be something else. The invitation is simple. Let go and discover who you are when nothing is in your way. Release your attachments and see what remains. Surrender your resistance and experience what emerges. Stop trying to control your life and start living it. The complete freedom you seek is not waiting for you in some distant future. It's available in this very moment when you choose to stop postponing it. The power to let go is the power to be free. And that power is yours right